Good afternoon. Welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Education Workshop. We want to let the public know that we are video recording this workshop. The recording is being streamed on the district's YouTube channel. And I want to first take a moment to make a brief statement regarding the outcome of Measure E and F campaign. While we are disappointed with the initial results from the ballot returns, we are heartened to see that there was a strong majority who voted in favor of both Measure E and F. Reaching the 66-67% threshold is always a challenge for any election. On behalf of the board, I want to express our tremendous thanks for the support of our parents, our PTAs, ed funds, staff, and community members who gave so much of their time and resources to support this election. Not all ballots have been counted, and it will be a few more weeks before the election is certified, so we can remain hopeful that news regarding Measure E, the parcel tax continuance, changes for the good. Once the results are final, if we face difficult questions and tough decisions, we will do so with integrity, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to the students whom we are entrusted to serve. Again, I want to express our deep gratitude to those community members who worked on the campaign, and thank you for your reliable support for our local schools. So now we'll call this meeting to order, and we'll begin with attendance. So Rachel, if you could start.
Good afternoon, Rachel Hurd. I represent Trustee Area 5.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jesse Van Zee, representing Area 1.
Good afternoon. My name is Shelley Clark, and I represent Area 2.
And I'm Laura Bratt, and I represent Area 3.
Hi, I'm Susanna Ordway, and I represent Area 4.
All right, great. Next, we can do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, can I get a motion to accept the workshop agenda?
Make a motion to accept the workshop agenda.
Second.
The motion was made by Board Member Clark and seconded by Board Member Hurd. Roll call vote. Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
All right, so we'll move on to 4.0 Board Workshop and 4.1 Facilities Master Plan. Assistant Superintendent Stella Kelp.
Good evening, everybody. Who has the clicker? Okay. Perfect. Okay. So good evening, trustees. We are excited to have you here this evening as we started this work in November 22 when the board approved the contract with the LPA architects for the development of the facility master plan. And tonight we have Andrea and we have Mariana here from LPA. We have John Isom here and Makiko from Isom Advisors. And before we go on with the presentation, I want to recognize our facilities team that's here who worked on this. Aaron Hurst, Abdul Mixon, Tina Peralt, Alana and Tammy were here. Tammy, who's in the back, helped us with some of the product that will be posted shortly after the approval of the plan. So before we begin, I just want to sort of wind the clock back a little bit. In February of 23, gosh, that was a year ago. Can't believe it. We did give an update to the board really around the progress that we had made. And our intention was to bring the facility master plan to the board in December of 23. And we actually slowed that down because we wanted to better estimate the growth at our schools that were affected by Bishop Ranch. And so we waited until the demographer brought the 10-year projections for our schools to so we weren't over planning, basically, is what we wanted to make sure that we were doing. So in tonight's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit, give you a little bit of a historical background on what the district has done well so far in our facilities work. We're going to go over the facilities master plan. You're going to engage in looking at some prioritization work. And then John will come up and talk a little bit about funding options. And Jared Boygan is here as well to talk a little bit about the next steps regarding what the board might want to consider. And we'll have a discussion about that. So with this, really clear about the why, and we want to focus on this is a long range plan. And in the plan, we have Why are we doing a long range plan? Because our school facilities have to be kept up to date. It is a vision. Plan is a vision for facilities. There are architectural drawings in there, but it isn't the plan when we go out to do a school, but we'll make those decisions as funds become available. We're going to talk about the what and then how we're going to go about accomplishing this through the funding sources that we have laid out. When we bring this back to the board, we'd like to bring it back on June the 11th, pending the discussion this evening. The board will actually adopt the plan. It's not, you're like approving it, you're adopting it as the guidelines for us as we move forward. And you'll notice that in the plan, we have phase 1 projects, which are the projects for the next 10 years. And then we are going to have projects that are slated for later. And one of the things I wanted to make sure that the board understands is that during this discussion later this evening, phase 2 projects can be moved up to phase 1. We just have sort of a window of dollars that we want to present to the board as for consideration for future funding. Okay. And I think that is over to you now. Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Ah, there we go. Move this up here. Okay. So we just made this sort of flow chart to make it clear of what exactly we're doing and what's happening next. So first we'll take the outcome, after we've shared with you. Andrew's going to share the priorities that have been made based on the district-wide engagement. And we're just asking for a preliminary approval of that list. And you can give us feedback, like Stella said, to shift up and down, up above the line or below the line, or phase 1 or phase 2, however you want to think about it. Then we're going to incorporate the feedback that you give us tonight. Then on June 11th, we'll bring it forward to the board for adoption. So again, that's not approval. The projects are not set in stone because you have to wait to get funding for that. So the next steps are then polling to get the feedback from the broader community, reconsider priorities as needed based on that feedback, solidify this multiple source funding plan, and then create a project implementation plan. So implementation is where you do set which projects are happening at what time. So after that, then the board will need to approve that implementation plan. So that's the difference between adoption and approval. So a big thing to keep in mind is that, and I'll explain, I think this group knows what the school facilities program funding source is, but to stay on top of that, the district has been following a 25-year cycle for modernization eligibility for the matching funds. So that's how the district has been able to stay on top of things. So that's been factored into the prioritization, very much so. Andrea will go into detail on that, like which schools are eligible when. So this is just a fact. Many of the facilities are old and they're outliving their useful life. And the district has great teachers that have been engaging with your learners in educational delivery that reflects what is needed for all to thrive, but the facilities really need to catch up with that. So I won't spend much time on this because I think you are familiar with it, but just to make a few points for the broader audience, qualifying projects include new construction, modernization, career technical education facilities, for example. School buildings qualify for this the matching funds every 25 years based on the date of original construction or last qualifying modernization project. And there's a bunch of paperwork that Tina does to make that all happen. So the reimbursements can then be used for other facility improvements. And even if you get the matching fund for one campus, you can use it on another campus. So any questions about this? Okay. So this is just to really document what a great job the district has been doing in the history of using the funds wisely and being good stewards of your resources. So you can see how 602 million of community support was turned into over 1.3 billion in facility improvements. And so you can see the breakdown there where in the last 3 bonds out of the 602 million, 437 million
in funding with when the applications are completed. There's a few more to complete. It'll be 73 cents back on the dollar. So the total funding for new construction, modernization, hardship, career technical education grants, the 443 from the state and the 286 million in developer contributions is quite an achievement.
And I think what's interesting about this is that San Ramon Valley is one of the leaders in the state and for sure in the county in the way that we've been able to use state matching funds to support extending the taxpayers' contribution for facilities. In the Measure D bond, the bond measure did not have language in there around utilizing the state matching funds to extend the bond projects. We will have to consider that as part of the resolution if the board makes a decision to do a future bond. Because they're not guaranteed. We wait on the availability of the bond dollars from the state. And when you put it into the language, you're saying that money that comes in will go to the next set of projects that are been prioritized down the list. Yeah, to the whole, yes, right.
Just to clarify, the state matching funds are only available if the state does another bond, right?
That's correct, yes. And I think the last 5 of the last 6 bonds, state bonds have passed. The last one, which happened to be named Prop 13, confused the voters and it didn't pass, but they will likely put one on the ballot for November of 24.
So just some more facts. You can see how the district ranks 7th out of 939 school districts for the total school facilities program funding allocation. And in districts, the total allocation in District 16 and in Contra Costa County received 32% of the total apportionment. So that's also quite an achievement. And in your packages, we gave an appendix that show all the websites where this data came from.
District 16 refers to Assembly District 16.
I think, sorry, Tina? Yeah.
Yes, that's Assembly District 16.
So this is just a high level overview. I'm sure the community is familiar with the district's strategic directions. And so well, it's focused on the stewardship of resources. We know this work focuses on other aspects shown here, which are built on this foundation of academic excellence, right? That's the #1 goal, and all of this is in support of that. So we gathered input from the district for the past 2.5 years, and the plan is responsive to those needs, but we're also working now to understand what the community is willing to support. So the needs show a vision, and to get a vision, you must implement different things along the way and prioritize what is going to be most impactful. So we have 3 big opportunities at the district. First one is to modernize 28 schools following eligibility timelines in the next 10 years. The second is to upgrade learning environments to reflect changes in education, technology, and safety standards. And the third is to accommodate shifting demographic and geographic student populations and programs. And we'll go into a little more detail about what these entail. So one thing is that the plan is not just to repair anything and maintain, but it really is also to evolve the facilities. We have to keep up with the pace of change in the world of work. So if we focus on the second challenge about upgrading the learning environments, the reason it needs to be done is because education is more important than ever. Technology is accelerating exponentially. So there are jobs, careers out there that don't even exist yet. So how do you prepare students for this unknown future? You need to have flexibility, and you need your facilities to mimic more the world of work and college and career readiness. So facilities for college and career are evolving, so learning environments need to evolve too. So from the past on the left, it's really more about what has a student memorized. All the students are sitting facing the front, while the teacher is just feeding the information to them. And now it's more like no one has a choice. Everybody has to become a lifelong learner to keep up with this rapidly changing world. So it's more about what does a student know? What can they do? What can they discover? Really taking more ownership of their learning with the teacher as a facilitator of learning. So again, just a sample of the past, what technology was. It's astounding how much things have changed and how they keep evolving. So it's both pedagogy and technology, and we have to keep up with that. And safety was another very important one. So looking at, the reality that ever since Columbine in 1999, this is something that's on everyone's mind. And so understanding that safety has many aspects, but in the built environment, it's really these layers of security that start from the outside with the public and community, then the campus perimeter, then getting to the building, and then within the buildings. So the other opportunity is how do you accommodate shifting demographics? So we just use Iron Horse as an example. The current student population is at 1,082, and it's going to increase to 1,365. So one example of a shifting demographic is that there's now TK, transitional kindergarten, that's been added. Another example is, and we'll get more into that detail, there's going to be growth in pockets. That's why we extended the schedule so we could look at the latest demographics report. So the newer wave of schools don't need as heavy a touch because they're coming up for modernization eligibility for the first time. And there is space in the schools, but that will be taken over with adding TK and future housing growth. So most new housing growth will occur in the Bishop Branch area with additional growth in the town of Danville. So just to go a bit through the process briefly, we did update you in February, but that's been a while. So we're just going to share with how we did this authentic engagement process with who and what were the outcomes. So the process is not exactly linear. There's always community engagement at the center, and I'll talk in a bit about the different committees that were involved. But our team kicked off with doing a facilities condition analysis, an assessment of every campus, about 100-page report on every mechanical system, every finish, everything is all documented there with costs. It also includes costs of replacement. So knowing if there's a mechanical unit, when that needs to be replaced. In tandem, we worked with the educational leadership, and we had a kickoff visioning session where we had them think about what students would be doing 25 years from now. What are they doing today? And what do we want them to be doing? How would their life be different in 25 years? So those two steps were very important to happen first and happen in tandem. Then we took that information to each campus. We had a visioning workshop with each campus, sharing with them the outcome of the condition assessments and the key drivers that came from educational leadership, followed by focus groups after the kickoff with the educational leadership. From that, we then took in the input from the campuses and we created diagrams. We had town hall meetings where the whole community was invited to come. It was very well attended. Everyone was able to give input. Then we met again with the principals of each campus and parsed out the input. And then we finalized the diagrams and did the rough order of magnitude cost estimating. So for those of you not familiar with the term, it means it's based on a conceptual plan. So it's not a set of construction documents. It's not exactly what it would cost. It has to be conservative and be a little bit inflated. So we also layered in the demographic studies. So the initial ones, and we layered them in again when we got the recent ones, and factor that into what we need to put into the diagrams. So Now we're at the point where the rubber hits the road, and that's how to prioritize the projects. It's very normal to have more need than what the funding, the feasibility of funding would be. You do things 10 years at a time and you prioritize what will have the most impact. So these are all the committees that we worked with. We found that your district just was extremely engaged, had large groups of people consistently coming to all the meetings, really a lot of passion and engagement with all these different groups. So in the appendix, there's more detail of the focus groups, but the bottom line is we had a lot of participation. Again, we've done over 100 master plans in California, and you got the highest number you'll see when I get to the survey results. So it's been a really great process. So this is the design guidelines visioning workshop that we had with the educators initially. Then it was followed by the focus groups. Then these are the outcomes of the campus visioning workshop. So we saw as we went to all the campuses, collecting what were the needs when we shared with them what the vision was from the educational leadership, and we found patterns. So patterns of needs. And then we came up with strategies. Some of these strategies are new space types that didn't exist at the district before, or they just started, such as wellness centers for all schools, learning centers as a central suite for service providers to work with students, and things like an annex for flexible multi-use space for when you have a mentor come visit a school, or for rainy day PE, just another space that can be used. It's flexible. So another part of the plan was the food service long-range plan. And all of that is to continue leveraging the great work the district did before LPA was hired, where grants were secured related to improving the dining experience for students because it's part of social emotional learning, and making food using a speed scratch cooking technique and less prefab, food that just is done in warming kitchens, heat and serve. And sorry, I forgot to say, reflecting all the different cultures that you have in the district too, which I think is pretty amazing. Then we worked with student focus groups also when we were finishing the design guidelines that are part of the deliverable. And it was really nice to see that the students were in alignment with the adults. They weren't asking for things that were unreasonable, like sometimes we get aquariums and kind of crazy stuff. They just really wanted flexible spaces to collaborate and space to work independently, and more spaces to work outdoors, which is really pretty much what the adults said. Well, we also went during the summer and went with some board members and others at the leadership at the district and visited some schools in the Bay Area that already have these spaces that have evolved to keep up with the times. So they had the opportunity to talk to the staff operating the schools and ask them how it was going, and see these kind of spaces like a maker space and a wellness center and a common. So that's on the left. So this is the result of the survey that we had to find out what the community's values were. And again, this is a record for LPA, the highest number of responses. So community 2,258, pretty evenly distributed in your different areas. And students, I do have to confess, they were doing it in the class at the end of a test or someday like that. So we managed to just good job with the teachers making sure that the students were taking the survey too. So 9,937. So the town halls were also very well attended. Lots of great input, very hands-on teachers also giving input on the design guidelines. So we went back and reworked certain parts of the guidelines to really tailor them even more for your district. So that was very helpful. Then we met with the principals after these meetings the next week and finalized the input, finalized the drawings, and moved on to cost estimating. So these are all the 4 town hall evenings that we had, and they're roughly organized by feeder. So I'll pass it on to Andrea to share what else we learned.
Yeah, it was a lot of information, as
I know.
a lot of different layers of info gathering. Won't go into every detail of what we learned, but more what we learned and how it informs our prioritization. So we did learn, as Mariana alluded to many times, that there was a lot of alignment and continuity between the different groups and the vision they all shared with us. So it was really nice to hear this strong, alignment with everybody, that everyone all shared the same vision. I think that really speaks to the communication strategies within the district and the strong leadership from your strategic directions, all feeding to this shared vision. And as Mariana also alluded to, the needs, once we put the final price tag on everything, they far exceeded your ability to fund, even in a potential funding scenario. And so that's really why we're here today. And I'll say this happens with every district. We have these kinds of board workshops because the vision always exceeds. There's only been maybe 2 districts in our entire history that have been able to fund the entire master plan, but that's extremely rare, and rarely even gone for or pursued because that number is just so big. But that's why prioritization is such a critical point, because it ties this need, the top needs, with potential funding. And again, just reminding you with this slide that as a district, you've done such a fantastic job at keeping up to date with taking advantage of those state matching funds, repairing your facilities, keeping them well maintained so that the public perceives them very well maintained. That can also become a challenge because now they're great. What more do we need to do? Well, they're well maintained for that older kind of pedagogical or educational model. And they do still need to continue to evolve for this, again, next century of learning, how teachers will be teaching in the future, how students need to learn in the future, to become these lifelong learners. So coming back to these big 3 opportunities, and we revisited these as we're working with district leadership to form the project prioritizations. How do we modernize the schools that will become eligible within this next 10-year window? How do we accommodate this rapidly changing world? And whatever we do with this modernization, that they go to facility improvements that really help reflect this new educational standard. And of course, accommodating this demographic shift, you got to be able to put the students somewhere. So using existing facilities to strategically plan the school facilities in a way that take advantage of your existing capacities and the geographic location so that the students are placed in the right location. So we'll talk about how to make it real. How do we align funding with facilities in a way that still aligns with this grander vision? So before we get right to the priorities themselves, we'll give you a little bit of a background. And again, this was alluded to before. We'll have phase 1 projects that are kind of above the line, things that we say we must do these within the next 10 years. And then the phase 2 is if there are savings that are actualized while we're implementing phase 1, we can start to move into phase 2, or all right, these are just the next in line projects. So we came back to these goals really came out of the overall vision, everything we heard from your district partners throughout the process, and these are in order of priority. So the number 1 priority is to take advantage of the modernization matching funds, because why not? It's free money, why leave it on the table? Let's pursue this so we can capture, to the extent possible, state matching funds to further invest in your schools. And we've already exemplified the great track record that you have there. So many different districts that we've worked with, Mariana said 100 different districts that we've worked with, leave that money on the table. And it's really a shame not to see districts go after this. So again, that's priority number 1 when we look at goals for project prioritization. Number 2, hard to argue with campus safety, building utilities, vehicular circulation, these safety and support systems that just must be considered for every campus. Transitional kinder and kindergarten. We throughout the whole process, wanted to explore it as a full day program. So we acknowledge that you have it as a half day program currently. And so as we get into the potential projects, we'll talk about, if you were to go to full day, what would that look like? But at least we'll get there. I won't spoil it. And then number 4, address those specific projects that build towards equity. So we try to make sure that no matter what campus you walk on, that you're walking into equitable facilities, that teachers are working in equitable spaces, no matter where you go. No one's working in a shambles of a building. We want to accommodate the anticipated growth strategically. As I mentioned, there are growth occurring in pockets and a decline enrollment occurring in pockets. So again, taking advantage of the existing capacity that you have to strategically and responsibly set school project or planned enrollments to accommodate the future anticipated growth. Number 6, enhance those outdoor learning environments for play, learning, outdoor dining. Implement those new space typologies that Mariana alluded to, the learning centers, wellness centers, annexes, these sorts of things that, it's not just extra, it's something that the sites across the board have expressed there being a priority for. And then last but not least, can we touch athletics and performing arts at the middle and high schools through this prioritization? So as we approach this, we know each site has its own unique needs and eligibility timeline and all these different factors. So you'll see this slide repeated as we sort of filter the sites through these different lenses that will inform our project priority list. So we've organized the sites the way we did for our town halls, which is roughly by high school feeder pattern. We know some sites split between high schools, so this is just one way to organize things, just to graphically see what we're prioritizing and where the eligibility happens. So here's everything. Now, if we look through out to 2030, and I've pulled back from that, we keep calling this a 10-year window. I'm pulling back a little bit because if we go to look at sites that are eligible for state matching funds in the next 10 years, we've already overshot our budget. So if we pull back a little bit and look at capturing state matching funds for sites that are currently eligible through 2030, they're the sites here that are still in black: Country Club, Iron Horse, California, Coyote Creek, Hidden Hills, Tassajara. I won't read every slide all the time. You can read it there. But we've got about 12 sites here that are either currently eligible or become eligible for the bulk of their dollars shown here in 2030. High schools are a different beast because they are such a large campus and have been added to or modernized here and there over the years. So you see the high schools appearing on both lists because they have projects appearing in both modernization timelines. Elementary schools, for the most part, were all built at the same time, or, a single campus, all constructed at the same time, all modernized at the same time. So those are a little easier to parse out. But when we look out at the sites eligible between 2031 and 34, kind of capturing that tail end of the 10-year window, we have these 14 sites eligible, plus the high schools that fall in both buckets. And then the remainder of the sites. These aren't coming up for eligibility until after 2034. And it's not because they're forgotten sites, it's because they've recently had work done. And so now they're still in line to receive eligibility funding. If we see that on a map, we see, now gotta really pay attention. Hopefully you can read the difference between the light and dark greens. But these are all the sites that become eligible within that 10-year window. And you can see just geographically where they land throughout the district. The darker green are those nearer term, eligible now through 2030, and light green further out, 2031 to 34. If it doesn't have a dot, it is not eligible until after this 10-year window. And if you can see the ones that are underlined, Golden View, Iron Horse, Montevideo, and Cal High, those are the ones that, according to the demographic reports, will be most impacted by the new development in Bishop Branch area. That's under their current enrollment boundaries. and stop me if you want to ask more questions, or we can always go back as we get through the information. As we developed costs for these projects, we organized them in these various categories for just straight up modernization, these special projects that build towards equity, the transitional kinder and kindergarten programs supporting the current half-day schedule. And it has a star again because we did do that exploration of half-day or full day. Safety and security, so fencing, fire alarms, other alarm systems, door locks, etc. Parking and drop-off improvements, playfield improvements at the high schools, outdoor learning environments, quads, any enhancement to the outdoor spaces that are not playfields. Tech, this is the site technology infrastructure, so not the laptop devices, but really the bones that go into feeding that tech. Site utilities and building systems such as HVAC and plumbing. And when we talk about modernization, there's two levels of modernization that, as we've defined it, and they're both eligible for the same sort of modernization that you get matching funds on. So when we say a refresh modernization, it's updating the existing structures, what you would typically think of as modernization. Interior finishes, you're replacing carpet, ceiling tiles, that sort of thing, mechanical, electrical systems. A deep modernization refers to a tear down and replacement of buildings. So as a school goes through these 25-year cycles, they may go through one 25-year cycle and get modernized. And then again, so now this building is 50 years old. At the 75 mark, are you really going to modernize it again? Or do we want to go in with a deeper touch and build new, replace with new construction? So that is really what deep modernization means. So the projects that, or the sites we've identified for our phase one are targeting those sites that are eligible between now and 2031. And these are the sites that we're looking at for a refresh or deep modernization underneath those lists. Some asterisks here. For Cal High and San Ramon High, we have limited scopes that we'll go through on a different slide. Monte Vista High doesn't touch the whole campus, again, because it's very piecemeal the way eligibility is coming through for it. So we'll go into detail on a subsequent slide as well. So modernization, it's not only touching the classrooms, we're catching TK and kindergarten for code compliance, ensuring every classroom has restrooms and sized correctly for that early childhood program. It catches the kitchen renovations as part of the food service long-range plan that Mariana mentioned. Safety and security is also included in these modernizations, technology infrastructure, as well as building systems and site utilities, as it may need to occur to support either a refresh or a deep modernization. So again, it would cost over 750 million if we were to prioritize all of the sites eligible within this 10-year window. But for today's activity in alignment with potential funding, we want that prioritization list for phase one to be closer to 600 million. So again, that's why we've held it back a little bit from all projects that could be eligible within 10 years. So that was only a small handful of sites. We want to make sure we cover all sites. So also included in our proposed phase one is to catch that TK and kindergarten improvements at all other sites that weren't already mentioned, safety and security and technology infrastructure. So this is to catch every other site that has every other site. We mentioned those the sites with limited scope. So for Cal High and San Ramon High, really focusing on safety, security, technology, playfields, and building systems. That also is true for Monte Vista High, and then some various deep modernization projects. And I'll go into that a little bit later. This presentation is very layered. We'll go into it. And building towards equity. Again, some buildings that aren't quite in line or up to par with the same type of building across all campuses. So that's Walt Disney Elementary School, their multi-purpose room, Stone Valley Middle School, the admin and library, San Ramon Valley High, the admin, Monte Vista High, Building 300 up there at the quad level, and then just district-wide outdoor learning. So why these projects specifically? Well, as we were going through our last meeting with the Facility Development Committee, it was brought to our attention or we were reminded that there are 4 schools that have the same NPR as Walt Disney. It's schools, I've got it, Walt Disney, Golden View, Montevideo, and Sycamore. And it is a style of multipurpose room and placement that is right at the front of school. It's often mistaken for the admin and had been brought up to us at all 4 sites as being problematic in its placement and its design. Now, Walt Disney is the only school of those 4 I mentioned that become eligible within the next 10 years. So let's snag that while we can and put that on the phase 1 project list. Stone Valley Middle School, the admin and library was selected because you've just rebuilt Stone Valley. Let's finish out that campus rebuild and make sure we catch these spaces as well. At San Ramon Valley High, again, the admin building, I don't know if I need to explain it. If you've been there, you understand. It's a building that just can't justify a continued maintenance to. We've got to go through and, right, yeah. We'll leave the second story floating, yeah, and then we'll just read. Yeah, in classrooms, yeah. So Monte Vista High, that building 300 there up on the quad level. Again, it's aged beyond the justification of continued maintenance. So we're proposing to replace building 300, tear that down, put a new 2-story science building there. The existing science building would then be lightly renovated to house other electives. And then district-wide learning and dining, I mean, it was brought up so many times. It's low-hanging fruit, so why not include it in phase 1? It will impact every student. Monte Vista High, again, that was, again, very specific project. So here's a almost total list, at least the total that we have been able to fit in phase 1 so far: safety, security, technology, building systems, the fields, that building 300 replacement with new science, a renovation of the commons building to align the kitchen and servery with the long-range kitchen facility plan, and a replacement of their admin and student services building. So if we look at phase 1 prioritized project list, this is what we see. Those full or partial or deep or refresh modernizations at the handful of campuses, all remaining sites for TKK, safety, security, technology, a district-wide allocation for outdoor learning and dining, and then those specific handful of projects: Walt Disney, NPR, Stone Valley to complete the campus rebuild, and San Ramon Valley admin building replacement. The Monte Vista High School projects are within that top category of full or partial modernization. So all packaged together, we're looking at 565.37 million. So if our target is 600, there is still a little room there, and that'll be part of our discussion, is if we want to adjust this list, either remove something to fit more in or just fit more in. As a phase 2, if we were to catch the remaining projects or to catch the remaining sites eligible between 31 and 33, we're looking at 270 million to capture those. If you wanted to explore TK Kinder as a full day program, I know it takes more than facility considerations, but the facility cost to go full day with your TKK programs would be another $60.9 million, and that would be adding 63 classrooms district-wide. So something to ponder there. Doherty Valley High, this is one site that was identified in the food service long-range plan as a high-need site that was the only site that was identified as high need that we hadn't already captured improving in phase 1. So we have it on here as a phase 2 consideration, or it can be bumped up to phase 1. And then Monte Vista, the theater, was also brought up as a priority there, but we placed it on phase 2 in case, to give you some flexibility in what we move above or below the line. So our phase 2, we're looking at another 332, almost 0.5 million there. So adding up those two big numbers, we're bringing forth to you almost $900 million in need, in this top tier priority need. And our goal today is to get your input to modify these lists as I've presented them to you to that $600 million goal, either the way it's been presented, or we can discuss how that might want to shift.
Can I get a clarification?
Mm-hmm.
You actually answered my question with regards to high schools because, you know, with San Ramon Valley High, right, recently, rebuilt and stuff. And I'm like, why is it in phase one? But I understand the administration building. You had on the phase one also Stone Valley. So is middle school considered a high school type to get matching funds?
It can be a little more piecemeal, and I don't know, Tina, if you want to speak to. Come up. Got it.
The Stone Valley, similar, right? It was recently.
So your question is like, does the middle school also qualify for funding? Is that what your question is?
Yes, because on your phase one list of priorities, you had Stone Valley as well. But because Stone Valley, and in the beginning, you had said that high schools are a little bit, you treat those a little bit differently, right? And so I was just wondering, okay, then you had Stone Valley on phase one. Stone Valley's a middle school, so would they be categorized as like a under high school type to get matching funds?
So what happens is it typically goes off the age of the individual buildings. So even at the elementary school, we have built a school and then added on to it like a year later. So the original construction would be under one application and then the addition would be under another application. So the applications or the eligibility is based on like the DSA, the date the DSA approved that project 12 months after that date. So you have to look at every building individually, pretty much. And so the high schools get really complicated because we try to keep the high schools in session while we're adding on or doing construction. So we're moving things all over the place, but we'll tear down a building and then we'll build a new building, put kids in there and then tear down another building. So it just kind of randomly gets eligibility over time.
And it could be spread out over 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
So,
Getting at typically an elementary school that's
right, it's one.
mostly together, maybe not all 1 year, but over 5 years or something. And the high school
Right.
is more pieced together.
So it's really not like a elementary, middle school, high school.
Right, it
It's
just
really,
happens that way.
it's really, okay.
Per
That answered my second question was like, can you take like piecemeal, like one building?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
just makes Tina's job more complicated.
Can you jump back to the phase two list really quickly? Because you did a really nice job explaining about, focus schools and then, but some projects that touch every school, which I think becomes very important when you're going out for a measure. So I just want to get a second look on phase two to make sure there's stuff that touches everybody.
So phase two, I mean, I guess if you went full day for TKK, you could touch all elementary schools. So phase two is less, I'd say less defined or less scrutinized because it's further out. And with phase one, phase one is where we want to really focus.
And conceivably, by the time we were contemplating a second bond to address phase two, there would be some phase three ideas that might rise to the top that touch everybody.
Right. I mean, for these long range facilities plans, it's recommended to keep updating them every 3 to 5 years, just to make sure these things that we set 10 years ago still hold true and really still are priorities.
Thank you.
So I think before we really get into the meat of discussion, we can go through John's presentation. We'll talk about funding.
So John, would you like to come up and share information about funding?
Clicker. Yeah, you can sit. Sure.
Okay. Great, thanks. Evening, John Ison, proud graduate of Green Valley Colts, Los Cerros Panthers, and Monte Vista Mustangs. They're losing to San Ramon in baseball and JV right now. My son plays, so a little bit sad, but In any case, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the funding aspect, obviously. It's important, this exercise that the district has undertaken, because this is a major big deal, right? This is something you do every decade. And so when you think about like the decisions that we make today are really going to impact students, teachers, and staff for the next decade. So I'm going to just talk about how school facilities are funded. And I think it's so important because I think a lot of people have this notion of like, oh, I don't want to pay taxes at all. It's like, that's great. That's great. You have that opinion, but you need to understand how school facilities are funded in the state of California. There's rules. There's essentially the game, and we have to play by those rules. And I appreciate it, and I'm not going to necessarily go back to that slide, but I'm going to remind us of it. There's really three primary sources of funding, right? And the state of California says, hey, developers need to pay their share, especially if they're impacting you with all these kids. They got to help build schools, pay for developer fees. State of California, we have an obligation, so we're going to do our part. We'll provide you with a share, but locally you need to do it on your own as well. And this isn't true just for the last 20 or 30 years. This goes back 40, 50, 60 years. The difference is in the state of California, voters approved Prop 13, which changed the rules a little bit. Didn't change the source of funding. Funds have always come from local property taxes. But before Prop 13, you, like a school board, could just say, hey, we need to build a new school. Treasurer tax collector, go collect taxes enough to generate enough proceeds so I can go build Monte Vista High School, right? 1965. The rules changed in Prop 13 to say, hey, we're taking the power away from governing boards, cities, counties, school districts, et cetera, and we're giving it to the people and letting the people decide. But it's still the same idea, which is it has to come from local property taxes. So there are a few other nuanced ones up there. I've crossed them off just so you didn't think we didn't capture all of the ideas, but those are kind of, spare change in the couch cushions, redevelopment tax increment that people hardly get. You're not going to get any facilities hardship. You're not going to receive any financial hardship. There are other options out there, but for San Ramon Valley Unified School District, developer fees, state aid, and local bonds. And I'm glad it was pointed out earlier. Number 7 in the whole state of California, as far as getting dollars from the state of California. Number 7. And there's like LA Unified, San Diego, there's some giant districts. So kudos to this district for doing their job. Also great job, obviously, in the developer fees. But where we are now, again, is this limited source of options. These 3 elements are developer fees, state bond funds, and a local bond. So developer fees projecting about 36 million. State aid about 124 million. And then that means the balance has to be through a local school improvement measure. We say 455 to 550 million. The good news is that the tax base here, because of all the wealth levels and the high home prices and real estate, is you could generate a lot more just based on math. I apply a $60 tax rate, we can generate $1 billion. But that doesn't mean that that's something that the voters would be supportive of or approve. So we're going to focus really primarily on the concept of this kind of $600 million target that you have by way of phase 1 projects. We want to go higher, we can go higher. We want to go lower, we can go lower. A survey and community outreach is going to give us a little bit more direction on ultimately what we probably want to settle on, but the options are there. That's one of the good news. I work with a lot of districts, and unfortunately for some of them, they don't have those luxuries. I have one little district, passed 4 bonds in the last 8 years. 4 full tax, 4 different bonds in 8 years because their tax base couldn't afford what they needed, which in this case was a new junior high school. So we want that junior high so bad. We want that gym. We don't have one in our whole community. So we do have some luxuries here. You guys may be familiar enough with how they work, but it's worth repeating. So the way district bond programs work is they take a district's assessed value, which is all the property value as assessed by the county assessor, and they assign a dollar value to that, right? Not market value, not what you can sell your property for. She's a great example. 1974, right off of El Cerro, assessed value $250,000, market value $2 million, right? So she's a poster child of like, hey, if you've lived here for a long time, you're paying pennies on the dollar. and yet you get the full benefit of improved facilities. So this table to the left adds up my mom's assessed value, my assessed value, all the people who own property within the district of any sort. Anyone who pays a tax to the county is under this assessed value group. We're at nearly $63 billion. So you have $63 billion in total property values, and we assign a tax rate to that. And every year, if you apply a tax rate to 63 billion, it's going to generate tax revenues. And picture a stream of revenues, just like a home mortgage. It's that stream of revenues that we bond against and get you dollars today, repaying it through tax revenues in the future. Okay. A couple of other interesting notations, of course, is the district historically has passed, a fair amount of bonds. Going back to 1991, I remember I was actually out of high school by the time that first one passed, so I didn't get to see any benefits. But I've had kids go through the system. They've certainly seen the benefits, as has a lot of neighbors. The tax rate right now is about $54 per 100,000 of assessed value. Okay, so when we talk about that tax rate, it's in this formula per 100,000 of assessed value. A lot of people misunderstand it. They think, oh, $54 times what my home's worth, or maybe just $54 period. But you apply this $100,000 calculation to give you an idea of what your tax would be. So my mom, if her house is assessed at 200, would pay about $108 a year as her share for the taxes that are currently on the books. The other thing I would point out, just to give you some context, is that last bullet on the right-hand side about the bonding capacity. So in the state of California, they applied these debt limits, and it's just a simple formula. Unified school districts, 2.5% of your assessed value. If you're an elementary, it's 1.25%. If you're a high school, it's 1.25%. So combined, 2.5%. Walnut Creek Elementary, 1.25%. Acalanes High, 1.25%, 2.5%. Unifieds are 2.5%. Your assessed value, when you apply that 63 billion and you look at how much debt is outstanding, has you a net debt limit of about 1.2 billion. That's just simply to say, if the district had the authority from the voters and the ability through a tax rate, that you could sell up to $1.225 billion and not be above your debt limit. So the idea that the district is way over, done too much bonds or too much debt, it isn't true at all. You're really kind of a little bit behind the times compared to a lot of peer districts. So here's the interesting part. Again, you have this really big tax base, and it's going to be a little bit nuanced, because you could certainly test and you could certainly say, hey, $60 new tax rate, and it generates over $1 billion. And that's an option that the district could consider. Not sure that that's the right option. There is sticker shock, certainly in some communities. There are others that say, hey, why don't we just grow into this? There's a show me that you can be responsible. There's a whole host of reasons why not going for the max may make the most sense. Many of you probably know that years ago, I think the last go around, there was this idea of, hey, let's keep the tax rate at 75. We're going to peg it at 75, and let's make sure that we kind of stay under that 75. So one option that we had here is to say, well, okay, we can do that. Issue of, about a $42 tax rate generates about $550 million. And we'll be able to combine and keep that below the 75, even with what we have on the books right now. And then when one of the bonds in the future falls off completely, we can come back with another bond. And between those two bonds, we could stay below 75 or at 75. So this particular one, I think the biggest takeaway is one of timing of receipts. It's a little hard to see, but you see in 2025, the district could get about 80 million. A couple of years later, 100 million. A few years after that, the big draw, about 300 million. And a lot of this is, again, because of some of our tax constraints of future revenue that's already obligated to old bonds. So let me show you how this looks.
You would do all that in one bond, but with these planned series to stay under the 75.
So we would do potentially 2 elections, because each election you're capped at $60. So you have this district kind of, promise or goal or objective of 75. but we can't ever do a $75 tax rate. I mean, you could, you need 2/3 approval. But it's better to do two 55% elections and combine the two. So this one visually gives you an idea. So the orange is what's left. So if we did nothing, our tax rate's gonna go down, 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 you know, and around $60 and disappear in 2031. Right? Based on all the bonds that are on the book, so to speak. But we're saying we could add the green, right? That would be about a 500 and some $1 million bond program, maybe $42 a year. So that's represented in that green bandwidth. You see, it's really small up top. That's why we can't get you a big amount on day one. But we can still get you meaningful dollars, obviously. And then perhaps later coming back and layer in the blue. So that would be another election. Now, this contemplates $42 here, and then you would have $33 later. But we could do $60 now and $15 later, or $15 now, or $60 later, or split it 50-50, $37.50 and $37.50, right? We don't have the answers other than to say we have the options. And we've got some flexibility. So this gives you an idea of kind of what your options are with respect to that third slice of the pie. Developer fees, it's a small slice, but they're not causing a lot of problems anymore. I shouldn't say problems, let's say capacity challenges, right? Like they're not impacting the school district like they did when there was a lot more growth. So they're not going to pay as big of a share. State of California says, here's the formula, 125 million, you're eligible for, keep milking us, you're eligible for it. But we've got to come up with the balance with the local bond measure. And how we get there really, I think, is going to be determined by kind of an assessment, quantitative feedback through a voter survey, qualitative feedback through, hey, what does the chamber think? What is the elected officials think? What do my teachers use, right? Are you okay with this $40 kind of concept, or should we do something different, right? There's going to be some listening in the coming months, hopefully, if that's where the district wants to go. With respect to what do you ultimately end up with, right? Because the best bond programs are ones where you listen and then you give to the community what they're willing to support. Not say, well, I think this makes the most sense. Now go convince everybody what a great idea it is. Right? So, I think that's the last line.
So what I'd like to do is let's maybe do rounds of questions first and clarification, and then perhaps go into the prioritization. Okay.
Can I ask a question about the idea of two election cycles? And you had 2026 and 2032. What would that mean in terms of election year? Would that be 25 and 31? I'm just curious. Like,
Yeah, and I
what
mean,
that
and that-
timing.
Yeah, the election there would be 24 would be potentially the first one, right? That's
Okay.
one of the questions before you tonight. And then likely in 2030 or 2032.
So 2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
They
so
have to
there's-
be in general elections.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Because
Yeah,
otherwise you
there's-
can't pass at 55.
Gotcha.
And as we know from last night, that's a very
That's,
important.
yes.
But so even in 24, if we did it November 24, does that go into effect on 2026, or is that just what this chart's showing us?
So 2024, passing 2024, you would sell in 2025.
Okay.
And that becomes the tax year for 25, 26.
Got it. Okay.
So there'd be a little sliver, that green in the 2026, we would have a few dollars of tax rate allocated to a new November 24 election. And then the next year, same, a couple of bucks, then a few more bucks, and then pretty soon in 2032, a full $40 tranche that's available in tax revenues.
John, could you talk a little bit about some financing options that would be available to quick start projects in anticipation of the sale of Series 2?
Yep, you bet. So school districts generally are going to get a draw, right, from these bond programs. The bond program draw is going to be limited by either a physical tax rate cap of $60. A lot of districts, they go to the max of $60. And if you can't sell bonds under 60, then you can't sell bonds. And then there's a political cap, right? So there's the first, the legal, and then the second we'll call the political. So if you have a $42 approved bond program in November, let's say, you don't want to go above that. Legally, could you? Yes, you could go above that. But if you say, I want to keep that $42 commitment, let's hold the line, but I also need money. School districts turn to what's called bridge loans. There's two that are the most common ones, called a bond anticipation note, or a BAN. Just like a TRAN that you might be familiar with, right? You're anticipating these tax revenues, you do a quick borrowing, and it's a short-term note that you repay. A BAN allows for up to a 5-year borrowing. So I can get BAN dollars, note dollars now, and then within the next 5 years, I'm anticipating this bond that I could sell to pay off the note. So bond anticipation note is the tool to use for really kind of this short-term duration. Or you could do certificates of participation, whereby a school district borrows essentially against its own assets or the general fund as the collateral. But really we're securitizing it with the bond. So I can get $100 million today in a BAN, but I need to be able to pay off that $100 million within 5 years, which when we would structure it, we would make sure whatever we want to do, we'd of course be able to pay it off comfortably. Or, hey, I want $200 million. And we'd say, but I don't think we can get 200 million in the next 5 years with a bond. So it's a takeout of that, but we could do a certificate of participation, which allows you to go longer than 5 years. Still the ability to pay it off from a bond sale in the future, but just allows you to go out a little bit longer. COPs tend to be a little more expensive, longer interest rate, right? So it's going to cost more, little higher cost of issuance associated with it. Usually you have some reserve requirements and some other elements that make it a little more costly. But the exercise for school districts is one of cost benefit analysis, construction cost escalation today of X for the next 5 years versus the interest rate borrowing of Y over a same 5-year period. Are you better off just waiting to access bond dollars in 5 years? Or are you better off borrowing the money today because construction cost escalation is going to be higher than interest rates? So that's it's an exercise that you can do. But yeah, tools are available, Stella, for school districts to access both dollars.
What are the going interest rates now for a program like that?
So surprisingly really good. Like anytime people ask interest rates, I smile, and only because the whole world thinks the end is nigh and the rates are so high. And I think, well, when I bought my first house in Walnut Creek in '98, I paid 7.5%. And my second house, I paid 7.25%. Like that was kind of the norm, right? For a lot of people that purchased homes in the 80s, 90s. Interest rates for bonds are still quite low. So I would say for bonds, you're going to be in the mid to high 3s because you've got a fantastic credit rating. We probably have a shorter term, but let's just say below 4%. A BAN, because of the short-term nature of it, is going to be a little bit lower. A COP is going to be a little bit higher. So COP, I think you could say maybe is 5%. The beauty of our industry is that you can't hold me to it because we would be forecasting out until next March of 2025 where rates would be. But municipal rates are still much lower than mortgage rates and things of that nature because there's a supply-demand dynamic where investors really want municipal bonds because they're tax-free, they're super secure and safe. And because of that demand and not enough supply, it pushes those interest rates down.
I have a question about the matching funds for California from state. So when I was on the FOAC, we had many projects going and had applied for matching funds. And we were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. What kind of timelines
More waiting.
Yeah. So then how does that affect our ability to continue with our projects if we're waiting years to get money from the state?
Yeah, no, I kind of joke about the more way. I remember that because I've been doing this for 25 years and you have these clients that are just chomping at the bit saying, hey, I need this money. I need this money. The nice thing about a bigger bond program is that you're not completely reliant upon the state to get going. The likelihood of the district getting funded by state dollars in the next, 3 to 5 years, or even 2 to 4 years, I think is really high, provided that a successful bond is passed in November. I'm very bullish. I haven't seen any survey data on it, but if you just look back in history and say, hey, in the last 30 years, how many state bonds have been on the ballot and how many have failed? And the answer is 1 has failed and 5 or 6 of them have passed. And the one that failed was, you forgot COVID. That's just a small detail, but Prop 13, worst number you can assign to any proposition in California, and COVID. And then fake news. And there's all sorts of analysis that would just like shock you. I'll share one thing. The county of Lassen, in their wisdom, said Prop 13 suspension. You know how counties will give a little summary of something. Lassen County said Prop 13 suspension, property tax suspension or something like that on their website. And they only got 18% yes. What a surprise, right? If you're threatening what they think is related to Prop 13. Historically, we went back and looked at all of Lassen's state support for statewide school bonds, and they were about 46-47%. So to go from like mid to high 40s, they don't support it all the way in Lassen, but mid to high 40s down to 18% tells you a little bit about the mindset of what people were thinking back then. So I'm bullish that we're going to have a successful bond, but if we don't, they'll put one back on. It's the state's obligation to fund schools, and that's the tool that they use. But yeah, that's my.
So that would be in November?
That's in November. I don't think they finalized exactly what it's going to look like. They've got a couple of competing, versions of it. There's some horse trading behind the scenes, different propositions, but I think everyone expects there to be a statewide bond on the November.
So we're thinking about we know that there's going to be a statewide bond, and then we would go out for a bond in November.
Well, that'll be up to you, and I think up to kind of this assessment process, surveying the community and having feedback from the community. You never want to go if you don't have a chance of success, but I think that would be, in a perfect world, yes, you would be on the same ballot.
Well, it's complicated by the fact that our parcel tax didn't pass.
Yes, yes.
And we also have elections on the board at the same time.
Yeah, I'll say this contextually. If you look back at all of the statewide bonds that were on the ballot and you say, how did school districts do with a statewide bond as a companion versus no statewide bond, they've actually performed better with a statewide bond. And I don't know if that's because you're getting TV and radio ads saying support the children, schools are great, even though it's not SRV.
The double reinforcement.
It could be a double reinforcement, or they just pick some really big turnout elections, like presidential elections are very favorable to tax measures for school districts just because of a really big turnout. So I tell people I'm never intimidated by having a companion statewide school bond on the same ballot. In fact, I would say I would rather be along there with it because of historical performance.
And if I could chime in real quick, in order to capture those state matching funds, the district has to front the money first. You have to pay for it 100% first, and then the state, through the paperwork, might then reimburse that 60%. So
you kind of want to be closer to the front of the line.
Absolutely.
Until they run out of state matching funds.
So you complete a project and then you submit it.
Mhm.
Do you have a comment you want to make on that? Because you're the one that
Because we have a
handles
backlog of
this for the
things that can
district.
already apply.
In our district, we've been fortunate enough to be able to front the money and then go back and get reimbursement for it or put in an application. The way the state program works is if you're doing like a modernization project, you need to submit your application. You can submit your application at any time once you get eligibility. But if you're doing new construction, you have to submit your application before occupancy of that building. So you have to be very careful as far as the timing. So what we're working on now is, even though we've, pretty much exhausted Measure D, we're still getting state match funding in, and I can still go back and take that match funding and apply it towards another project that's eligible and then get more money from that project. So it's kind of a rolling type of thing. Yeah, you gotta play a strategy game.
Yeah.
And you have to be very strategic on what you do and how you submit your projects.
And that's why I mentioned so many school districts don't play this program and leave that money on the table. They'll get the bond from the community and do the projects. And that's why it's so important that we target the strategic direction of being good stewards to the community. So yes, we are asking this of you as a community, but we will then turn this money into additional investments should the state pass this bonds.
CSBA is actually a key sponsor on a bill that would provide an office to help small districts do what Tina does because they don't have Tinas. And so wonder if that goes, if it might make it a little more competitive. We won't be able to take so much of a share if other people get good at doing this.
You'll get to take your same share. It just might be a question of timing, right? It's just a formula. Like I said at the beginning, it's the rules of the game. It's a formula. You get this much based on the formula, whether or not it runs out and you get your full share, or whether you have to wait for another bond remains to be seen. There's talk of it being a very large bond. There's also talk of it being a little bit smaller. But I always tell folks, they'd say, what's my guarantee of getting? I say, well, 100% chance of not guarantee of getting any money if you don't have a local match.
Yeah.
That's 100%. I'd rather take 100% I'll get it. It just might take several years.
Let me ask a quick question. So based on this kind of timeline, we're discussing potentially putting this on for November 2024 for the Series A, which we're talking about generating approximately 80 million. Am I reading the slide right? It's the one back before this.
Yeah, so
then-
go ahead.
Yeah, and then getting a ban to cover the next several years until we can get to 2031 and do another bond measure. Is that how that
Possibly.
works? Okay.
Yeah, so the way that it works, when voters go to vote on a school improvement bond measure, they're giving you really just one thing, which is a dollar amount.
Okay.
We disclose how we might spend the money. We're beholden to some degree to how we spend it, but if you have a laundry list of 100 projects, you're not forced to do 100 projects. Things happen, you open up a wall, asbestos or something bad, or construction costs go up, or COVID hits, and all of a sudden I only get to do 80. So you're never obligated to do everything on a project list. You're precluded from it if it's not mentioned. The tax rate even is an estimate, and we do our best to be conservative, and we say, hey, this is our estimate of what the tax rate is, but then it's very clear. Things change, interest rates change, assessed values change, property values change, district objectives change, right? So there are options for districts to exceed or go below that tax rate as well. So that tax rate's fluid, your projects are fluid. What's not fluid is the amount. So if you were to go to voters, you would go to and ask them for a simple yes, no on an authorization amount of, pick a number, 550 million, 450 million, some number. And then from that authorization, it's up to us to work with the construction team and the district to get you the dollars when you need those dollars.
Got it.
So this is a hypothetical of you can get 80 million based on capacity.
see.
And then we do a ban that, yeah, we could probably do a ban that could be a COP.
Okay.
But this is a hypothetical based on a hypothetical tax rate even.
Got it. So it's a total amount of money, but we're setting the cap at, or we're setting the cap at $75 per $100,000 of assessed value. So it's not going to go above that. That's how it all works.
Well, even
Okay.
that, remember, the tax rate's fluid.
Yeah.
So during the Great Recession, we didn't have it really in San Ramon Valley, but think of Stockton, think of Lodi, think of the Inland Empire rivers that were just building homes like crazy. Their tax base saw massive contraction. So they would go from a $10 billion tax base to like 9 billion. Because these homes that people were gobbling up and paying 500,000 are now being sold at 300,000. Remember all the foreclosures and everything. So in that scenario, the tax rate that was pegged at, pick a number, $60 actually went up because the assessed value wasn't there to support it. Now, most districts, especially affluent districts like San Ramon Valley, the tax rate goes down. If you added up all of the tax rates that we estimated to voters back in the day, you would say, wow, I've been paying less than what you told me. Why? Because our assessed value exceeded projections. So we provide an estimate of whether it's 42 or some other number. We provide this political estimate of perhaps we want to stay below 75. We provide a bunch of projects to give great direction without obligating 100%, obedience to it. But we're capped at the dollar
Got
amount
it.
of the total bond.
But as far as new dollars, because we're capping at that 75, that's why that green portion's so low up until 2031. Because we already have existing bonds that come up close to that.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
So
This
the
is a-
red
yep,
is
yep.
existing.
Voters, we want to be sensitive to you. We said $75 back in the day. We think that feels right in our district. We want to keep doing that. Approve some number, $500 million. We'll just use that as our round number going forward. And this is how we get that 500 million is the green. We apply a little bit of that tax in the first few years, and then after 6 years, those old bonds go away completely. And now all we're left with is the green.
Great. Yeah.
Now possibly in 2030 or 32, we do a new election, and then comes the blue on top, right? The whole idea, in a perfect world, you would just keep paying $75 if you're a resident of the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. But we always have to ask permission, after Prop
So
13.
that's why with the 2002 bond and the 2012, and then the plan was 22, it's just some things interrupted that, was you keep that steady thing.
Correct.
No surprises. You still have to go ask the voters, but you can also sell it as, look, this just keeps going.
This is what we just, no tax increase. We just want to keep paying the 75 that we've been paying for all these years. Let's just keep paying, no tax increase, right? That's the kind of the concept that could be well received here. Again, it's all hypothetical. Sounds good to me, sounds good to us, but we still have to test it.
Especially
Yeah.
because your property owner, assuming they're not moving, their assessed value is only going up by 2%. So they're not feeling the market increases like the new residents are.
Correct, exactly.
You have more questions?
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
So this mechanism, the CPO,
COP,
COP,
COP.
that's the thing that a while back got such a lot of negative attention, wasn't it?
You're thinking.
Or was that?
You're thinking tab.
Cap, okay. So
CAP.
it's not that, so,
Correct.
okay, good, okay, thank you.
And cabs aren't bad.
No,
by
I
the
mean,
way.
if they're used correctly, they're not.
Yes,
It's just they turned into a boogeyman and then,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, so what we want to do is, I think, I'm gonna look at you. Okay, so we have two choices. We could continue to talk about financing and then go into the prioritization. If we talked about the financing, I think we need to have a discussion regarding the desire to assess the community, and we could have Jared come up and join us at the table to talk a little bit about that, and then go on to the prioritization, or we do the prioritization first and then come back and talk about what we do next with hearing from the community.
I feel like we should kind of continue on the finance side and then go into priorities unless someone else has a
I
different.
have
opinion.
one other question that I think is related to that. So we've talked about fall of 2024, which clearly will have a high turnout because of the presidential, but can we also talk about what the next option would be, which would be in the governor's primary, right? January
June
26th.
of 26.
Yeah, June 26th. Not June. Because
So we can.
I'm concerned about the parcel tax election that could we really do 2 in 1 year?
So we can do it in a general or in this other governor's primary,
That's a general to also.
and that's also considered.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's governor and presidential
Yeah,
are
okay.
generals.
Oh,
It's
I
a
see.
primary and a
I
another
see.
thing.
The scoop.
So there's 2 opportunities in the even years and no opportunities in the odd years.
Yeah, and I feel like that question too might, we might, with the community survey might have a better understanding of one or the other.
All right, so we have Jared now has joined us at the table from Team Civics.
Thanks, Stella. How would you, I'm not totally sure. Do you want me to start with kind of going through this slide, or where's the right place to begin here? What's helpful?
I think let's talk about November 24, sort of what the timeline is for that. What are the steps that would get us there? And then what the timeline would look for if we decided to do June and our various options.
Yeah, okay, so generally speaking, I don't know, I guess the slide isn't part of the visual package, but what you have in front of you. These are and you've probably seen this from me before in the past, right? But these are the steps we go through to plan for a potential ballot measure. And obviously that yellow arrow is the independent campaign. We've all kind of wrapped up, some hard work. Sometimes the voters are with us, sometimes they're not with us. It's sort of in their hands. We work hard. But the 3 steps we take before that are things that the district can do to get ready for any kind of ballot measure, whether it's a bond or a parcel tax. In this case, for a bond. So first you do a feasibility, which generally starts with a voter survey, which tells us, is this possible and under what conditions might it be possible? Then there's public engagement, awareness building. The district cannot advocate to say we need to pass a bond, we need your support for a bond, but the district can raise awareness. So what you're doing today is 90 minutes or 2 hours of very detailed information. That is too much for the average voter. You got to find a way to distill it, but still include them in this conversation. And that's a site by site conversation. You've done some visioning at the sites, which is great through, LPA's leadership and others, but you need to find a way to engage sort of the rank and file parents and staff to say, oh, what are the needs at your school and what are school improvements, could be possible and what might a bond fund and, what might it cost and that kind of thing. Then you put together the ballot measure. The ballot resolution is a little bit more complicated with a bond than we saw with the parcel taxes. It has, as John was alluding to a few minutes ago, a project list. You're not obligated to those projects, but as he mentioned, you're precluded from doing anything that's not on the list. So you'll have your bond counsel in to help write the resolution, to put a project list together. There's a tax rate statement that John prepares that goes with that resolution. So it's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit of a thicker packet than the parcel tax resolutions are. And then ultimately you kind of get on the ballot. And in this county, you have an 88-day deadline for completing these 3 steps before any kind of ballot measure. So for November this year, that 88-day deadline is August 9th of 2024. So that's exactly 3 months basically from where we are today to put something on the ballot. And then for June of 2026, Rachel, to your question, that would be March, probably that first or second Friday in March of 2026 would be, so you'd probably have a February 2026 board action when you would adopt this bond measure resolution to be on, if polling suggested June was a good idea for us. Which we're not there yet, but that would be the thing to think about. And so that's one of the struggles with these bonds, is you really are limited to these even year regularly scheduled elections, primaries or generals. Parcel taxes you can try in a special election because of the 2/3 requirement. When they lowered bonds to 55, one of the things that was part of that compromise was locking you into these other regularly scheduled elections. So no special election opportunities for the general obligation bond. So if we miss this November, it's a 2026 option. And Rachel, as you said, that's complicated by the parcel tax challenge. So which I believe expires mid 2025 if it's not renewed.
So, one of the things with the parcel tax that we talked about last night was that we didn't have enough ramp up time. So if we're trying to go for a bond in November 2024, are we really going to have enough ramp up time to be able to reach enough people to get it done? Especially in view of the fact that we have exhausted a lot of our volunteers with the parcel tax. And the bond is a lot more money on the taxpayer and is critically important to the district. So that just seems like really fast.
Yeah, I mean, the November 2024 election, John mentioned this a couple minutes ago, the dynamics are kind of the opposite dynamic of what we just experienced in the parcel tax, in terms of the parcel tax being a low turnout, off-cycle election. The presidential election, even if people don't care for these candidates, is still going to be the highest turnout in a 4-year window, right? It's going to be in this community, it'll be north of 80% voter turnout. So that's a very different, we're going to end up being in the high 20s or mid 20s on the parcel tax. That's a very big difference in turnout. So those dynamics are a little bit different in terms of who participates. And we have not pulled a bond in this district for probably 2 years.
It's 2018.
Well, we did some
13?
polling. We did some polling in 2020. There was some talk even about like,
Is
yeah,
that when we asked about the employee housing? Okay, so
Yes.
it was 2020, not 18.
Yeah, so but it's been a few years, so we don't really have updated polling, and so I think to your point, Shelley, we would probably want to do some polling about November. You know, in my mind, I think you want to have this discussion about parcel tax first, because I think you know, it would have been great if the voters had passed both of these parcel taxes yesterday. I think we all knew kind of going in that it was a little bit of a stretch ask to put two on the ballot at the same time, and we really hoped to save the COVID programs as well as the Measure E renewal. Didn't happen. So now you are faced with this reality of what happens to the Measure E money. And parcel taxes are harder to pass if they go away than they are to renew. So the Measure E money, not to mention that you'd have to go through a pretty tough budget cycle if you had a year of not having that revenue. So I think I would encourage you to sort of think about what does that, your Measure E renewals, you have opportunities this fall or spring of 25. I think the spring election dynamic, it might be a little bit different in an odd year than an even year right after a presidential primary, but you know, it was a challenging to get volunteers and to raise money. All those things were hard. You know, does the higher turnout on the natural help us with the parcel tax in a way that a spring special wouldn't? You know, we probably want to get to the bottom of that question, I think. And I'm not sure I would do a parcel and a bond at the same time in November. That I think we just kind of did two elections at the same time.
Yeah, because if $98 extra is a challenge, bond cost be.
Well, keep in mind though, the bond it would be designed to be kind of a no tax increase.
True,
That's
that's a
the-
good point. Thank you for saying
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Can I ask
Oh, that's interesting.
what the timing would be for that stage one? If we're how long that would take, so when we would really be able to have some valid conversations around.
I mean, I think we could go, and it's possible Jessica Polsky from EMC Research is on the Zoom here. I'm not sure if she's here, we have her. We do not have her. Okay, so, I mean, she was thinking that we would be potentially prepared to go pretty quickly and pull either a bond or a parcel tax. So in this case, maybe we would pull two no tax increase measures at the same time. And that's sort of what you're proposing here.
So just focusing on the renewal, say the programs from F or that another day.
That's for
Right.
another day, I think.
But the advantage of at least continuing with the parcel tax renewal is people know what we're talking about, at least some of them do. And while volunteers are exhausted, they also are very concerned.
And we know how close it is. I mean, we still don't have this, the final numbers, but it's close regardless. And I think that, with the dynamics of a general election, you're gonna have campaigning on a couple of different things at the same time, rather than, a small group of people going out in a special way to campaign. People are gonna be just campaigning, and then you just add in these things in the campaigning experience.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that is different with a special election or a low turnout election compared to a big general election. You know, during campaign, your job is to keep people in the tent, so to speak, right? Like, I know you're supportive of me because we did a survey and it said you're supportive of me. So I'm going to make sure you stay supportive, but then I need to get you to vote, right? That's the heavy lift for a campaign committee. A general election, you still have to do the stay with me, reinforce the support, but there's a lot less lifting on getting people to vote because Trump will do that and Biden will do that and state propositions will do that. So the campaign committee's job is less about getting people to vote and more about, hey, just make sure you vote yes and stay supportive because I know you're going to go vote because everybody's going to go vote.
And vote your whole ballot, because it could be kind of long.
It'll be long.
Because we know
It'll be long.
San Ramon and Danville both have
Yeah.
some measures in the works too.
So let me ask you a question and kind of push back on something that I was hearing during the parcel tax discussion, which was we're going for special. We're spending the extra dollars to do it because we don't want to get it confused in the general election wash. I feel like I'm hearing the opposite now of going for this in November. So that's why I'm going to push back and go, this is different
Well-
story. So help me unpack that.
Well, there's a difference between a presidential primary and a presidential general. So I think in a general election, everybody's going to turn out. In the March presidential primary, it was primarily kind of a Republican primary
Yeah.
and maybe even not much of that, honestly. And so that's, you know, when you're in a primary environment, I think we're seeing both political parties, the sort of core of them has really retreated to their ideological corners in the
Yes.
last few years. A general election is not like that. A general election brings together the whole nation. It's sort of a more of a conversation to the middle, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that tends to be a better environment for sort of a, you know, a civic enterprise like funding your schools. A presidential primary is often just a purely ideological enterprise and not necessarily in a constructive way. So I think that's where I think we were concerned about that
Got
sort
the
of
message getting.
the national ideological debate of a primary when both parties are appealing to their most corner
Yeah.
base.
Yeah.
That's different than a general election.
So those same rules don't apply in the general election. And it's also less expensive than a special election.
And you get, as John said, a higher turnout. I mean, the presidential primary really wasn't much higher turnout than this special election that we had. It just was full of ideological
Yeah.
camps. The special election was low turnout, but it was at least sort of our people and our homeowners. They just, you know, kind of weren't with us at a 2/3 level. They're with us, you know, strong majorities are with us, just 2/3 is really hard. So, and you know, that's the alternative to the November is, you know, the special election in spring of 25. I think one lesson we can take away from this parcel tax exercise is in the old days, we used to do a lot of phone banking to ID these voters and turn them out. You cannot do that anymore. So I think we tried a walking program. And I think we learned some of the limitations of a walking program. You know, how much volunteer energy can you get? You know, how far can you reach?
Yeah,
So
it's kind of hard to judge how much is the volunteer energy and how much is, are people home? Do you get to even talk to them?
Yeah.
So-
that's right. And so that's the one thing about, you know, if we pushed it all the way off till a special of 25, we still couldn't phone bank. We'd still be back on the walking. So, you know, that's why I think it's probably worth exploring this big, bring everybody together turnout on the parcel tax. And I think we'd have to talk to our pollster about it, but you have a big electorate here. You have a big enough sample. So one thing we could explore is sort of like a polling split sample where it's just the parcel tax and one that's parcel tax and bond. Especially the sort of no tax increase ideas. I hadn't realized that. That's, you know, 2 no tax increase measures, you know, might have a better chance than, you know, what we just tried and also in a bigger electorate. So we could at least do that feasibility, Laura, to your question, you know, get the survey done probably in the next, you know, 30 days here, 21 days. And
probably one of the things we also need to explore is the CPI increase on the parcel tax. I mean, I think for the parcel tax to continue and to have impact, we're gonna have to try to push the CPI increase, but we need to explain
and
it.
you need to renew it.
Yeah.
Is what you need to do. So I mean, I worry a little bit. I mean, I feel like we did our kind of aggressive push. You know, let's see if we can make a CPI. Let's see if we can get an extra $98 for these other programs.
So just play it safe.
We tried. I mean, you know, at this point, my counsel would be try this parcel tax one more time and get it.
And Jared, you can, the pollster can do kind of a post-mortem and you could ask questions like, why did you or someone you know vote no? Was it because it was asking too much? Was it too confusing? Was it, I don't trust the district with the money? Was it, I'm anti-tax? Is it inflation in the economy, right? Like those are things that we could test and get feedback to make adjustments going forward, right?
We could. I don't always trust people's sort of memory of why a thing happened. They may say a thing to a pollster, but I'm not sure if that's why they did it in the moment. And I also think with 3 months till decision time, I'd almost rather focus on the forward looking. Like, let's really figure out, you know, how do we advance whatever discussion you guys are going to advance in November? It does seem to me that this November election with the turnout you have, you guys should probably have something on there with this high turnout. It's the best turnout in a 4-year cycle. It is a different dynamic than a special, but you have these 2 separate funding needs. It seems like you ought to take advantage of at least something,
Or at least,
November.
or at least exploring
at
it.
least exploring it.
Do
And
the
so,
survey and then
yeah,
and you
so
can
we
look at
should
the
really,
data, but-
yeah, figure out what looks viable to us.
Would the 2 measure idea, but being in 2 things, so they would need different communication pieces, but you could have the same idea that you're mobilizing the same.
Yeah, you'd still run, if you had them both on, you'd still run a joint campaign. I'm talking about a split sample for the poll, so you
Yeah,
can
no, I
figure
I
out,
was just thinking.
can the partial
campaign
tax
dynamics, that's
and the
what I was
bond coexist, or just the partial tax do better, does it need to be by itself to get to 2/3? I think that's, because you sort of, it's a big hole in the budget. if it goes away.
2/3 is really, is challenging to get there. And that's where we want to make sure that with the no tax increase concept, would 2/3 get it across the finish?
Yeah, we probably have to play it safe, but we also have to look at how many things will be in front of these local voters.
So is that sort of, I don't know if this is like action, I don't want to step outside, but should we sort of have some direction here to start moving that survey forward? I think I'm sort of hearing that as a sense of the group here, but
Survey.
I'm not sure how we proceed.
Cindy, do you know, do we need to take action in order for that to move forward? I mean, I know we can't today, but
But you can give direction for.
And then something could be on action for
Yes.
next week.
So and I'm not the expert that you are on poll, but I am curious if direction on if we do the survey soon enough. Is there still enough data there in the postmortem where people remember if we structure the survey correctly that might give us a glimpse, or at least, better than anecdotal?
We can
evidence?
ask, we can certainly ask. I mean, I would want to do it sort of in the end of the survey, not the beginning, so
Yeah,
we get a
so
good
you don't-
clean read
yeah.
on the new proposals. But we could certainly ask, hey, are you familiar with, did you vote?
I think
What
there's
do you-
also analysis to do comparing this election to the last one in 2015 about the no's.
Okay,
Because we might find that no population represents a similar number of people.
Mhm.
Registered voters has changed a little bit, but that the difference between the two was how much of the parent population we got that aren't typical voters.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the whole strategy, right? And so we've always said there's a certain percentage of the community that's going to support anything related to public education. There's a certain percentage of the community that's just very anti-tax measures. And the difference in between the two is what wins elections, and especially 2/3 elections. And so if we can actually look at those proportions from 2015 and now, might be more informative than even asking
Yeah,
about did you, because
so the demographic breakdown
We can,
versus.
yeah, we can actually pull that file once everything has been finalized. The last time I came before you, when we were talking about doing a parcel tax, I got direction from the board to continue planning and to bring information back at a future meeting once we had finished the poll. So, and then you would take action when it's time to make a decision about what is placed on a ballot.
How much granularity is there gonna be in that data once they finally finish the count from the clerk recorder's office? Does it go down to demographics, party affiliation?
oh, everything.
Because you like everything, but
We-
basically the name, right?
we know who voted, but we don't know how they.
How they voted, okay.
You don't know who.
Okay,
But we
so
have
we
a
don't
lot of
know if they voted
granularity on
yes.
who voted.
Okay,
And you have some granularity on the where they voted. So the
Yeah.
precincts broken down. Is there a geographic area that, we blame it on Alamo or blame it on San Ramon? I'm Alamo, so I defend ourselves. But do we, is there a geographic area that we have weakness in? Okay, then that's an area that, okay, maybe that needs a little more education. Is there an area that was, wow, super supportive, but their turnout was terribly low? Okay, those guys need a big push, even though Biden and Trump are going to push them, they could use an extra push because those guys really supported us. Maybe 70% in the Greenbrook neighborhood. Oh, then let's make sure we get more Greenbrook voters out because that's a rich supportive group. So there's a lot of granularity that we get out of it, but we don't know
yes or no?
the demographics of who voted yes and no. We know geographically, but we don't know ethnicity or gender or anything.
And we can layer on who we identified as supporters. too,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, and we were tracking
Or
that.
no,
Yeah.
identify no's too.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think your instinct is right. I mean, if I, just off the top of my head, I know that in the 2015s and 2011s and stuff, 2009s, we were seeing turnouts more in the low to mid 30s for these special elections, and this one's going to finish kind of in the mid 20s. So we didn't get, and now the population's grown quite a bit since 2015 in this year. You have a lot
And I
more
think
registered
the
voters.
other lesson to learn is those ones that passed were in odd years, so your special election wasn't getting confused
With the presidential
with
primary.
didn't I just vote?
Yep.
And the things that we heard constantly in this about people being
Yep.
confused.
I think that's
The only thing about with the parcel tax, we have, if we go in November, we have some momentum built already. And if we can get out to our parent community and change our messaging a little bit about the importance of this and what it's going to mean to their kid and to the to the school district in general, I think we can build on that. Whereas if we wait until next year or whatever, then it's kind of like people forget about all this stuff and we don't have that same momentum. So I think we can use that, even though I know it's a short period. I actually like the idea of the bond and the parcel tax and the no tax increase and making one huge push to get the community to come together and support us. And we have a much, I mean, it can work to our disadvantage having the general, I get it, but it didn't work having a special election this time. If we get a bigger pool of people, maybe we'll fare better if we can keep that momentum going.
What's the additional like, what's the cost per line item is it a cost per line item or is it gonna be a total cost to put all three things on?
You're talking about on the
As-
ballot
as-
itself or versus
Yeah,
the,
like as far as like
survey?
running the election, yeah, the actual ballot.
I'm sure there's a cost per measure, but again, to your point,
It's
it's
lower.
marginal. It's the lowest possible and the presidential because they have the most things, so they're spreading the cost out among the most payers.
Got it, okay.
And the messaging of the two very straightforward, this isn't gonna change your property tax, would be a very powerful message.
Yeah, and there's probably different allies for each advocates for both measure, right? So there is something to that. Actually, it's kind of interesting with the no tax increase model. So that's definitely worth, I would say, pulling.
And I would just add, kind of having grown up here and doing these things, bond programs for 25 years, sometimes there's a false sense of security as well, right? You put these measures on and sometimes they don't pass and people say, oh, I was shocked. I didn't even vote on it or I didn't volunteer for it, right? And I think you'd say, okay, we lost. We're going to make a few little tweaks. We're going to do it again. And you have that much more of an energized, motivated person. Like I didn't volunteer last time, but I'm not going to let this fail. Right? Like if I'm a teacher and it's like, oh my gosh, the parcel tax failed, we need to actually get out there and walk and we need to do our part, right? So more motivation could exist. But I'll say this, I am a big believer in kind of the transparent approach and trying to give to the community what they're willing to support. I can't emphasize enough of how many successful programs are just simply saying, what do you want to pay for? What do you want to do? And if you don't want to do it, don't do it. Right? I'm class of 1990, silver anniversary at Monte Vista. And then so many of those buildings haven't still been touched, from when I went to school in 1990. So what is that, 50 plus years now? And so if folks don't want to do it, okay, then fine. You'll just continue to have the facilities that you have. But I think this is a community where you have a lot of support, tremendous deep roots and love and connection to the facilities and the schools. But it's a matter of crafting something that they can get behind. And if it's not 500 million and it's 350 million, thank you very much, San Ramon Valley voters, for $350 million. We'll take it. If it's $1 billion, hey, that's great too. But let's figure out statistically what the voters would be willing to support.
John, if I could ask, so on a no tax rate increase bond, what kind of authorization amounts are you?
We're between like 450 to 550. A lot of it depends on the length.
Right.
So we can fit it in. Actually, if you look at this model here, this contemplates 2 measures over the next 6 to 8 years. But you see the green, we can shorten the green to make it smaller. We can lengthen the green to make it bigger. But
And the light blue would be the second.
would be a second authorization down the road. Again, voters willing.
So
So
Come to the microphone, please, Makiko. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that is it on?
Green lights?
Oh, it's on, yeah. Just, we talk about no tax rate increase, but it's an extension of the $75, not the current rate. So I just wanted to make that
Yes.
distinction real quick.
yeah, great point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Important to get that
$75.
exactly right.
Yeah, correct.
And we'll have to get, so we'll have to get bond counsel involved in this polling so we can see, how do we get to write that
Mhm.
question?
Yep.
But I think we can, with sort of, you're sort of like, let's keep working and bring the board information direction. I think we could get moving pretty quickly on, with John's and Makiko's help, getting a survey together that can test these two scenarios. It's an interesting idea and, give us a chance to think about, what's your path forward for November, what's possible.
And timing wise, that would look like in one of our 2 June meetings, we might be able to have on the agenda.
Yeah, you'd have results.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we'd have to have a special meeting probably to authorize because
In July, we have a meeting in July.
scheduled till August, right?
Yes.
What's your end of July date? Perfect.
Okay, that would be perfect. 23rd? July 23rd, mark your calendar. Okay, so I believe I have direction from the board to go ahead and poll and see where our community is. And I think now the next step is to prioritize projects.
Thank you both.
So we're actually at the end of the presentation portion, and I have on my, let's just back up to. Back up to our list. So in your board packet, you have all of these pages that have, everything itemized and the dollar amount, tied to it. So it's really a matter of, is this the right strategy? Do we have the right things on this list? Do you want to move anything from phase 2 up to phase 1? And conversely move things down? So I guess first a question of your reaction to this list. Does it feel right? Is our approach and the strategy that we put behind it, again, not just LPA, but working with your district leadership and planners here at the district to develop this list? Is this the right approach?
I've been in some of the meetings, the planning meetings, and it felt like there was a broad group of stakeholders that were deeply interested and, having conversations about the details of all of this. And so I think it's important for us to really look at that information and start there, in terms of all the data that you've collected. And I do like when I look at this list, I like the fact that you have the district-wide, the all remaining sites, you're looking at that equity lens with these priorities, but then also making sure that we're really getting into those sites that really need some love. So, yeah.
So I think it's a no-brainer to do the first ones because of the state matching funds. We need to have those and those schools all need those things. I think it's going to be important to communicate to the community if their school isn't in that particular list or that makes this list, why, what our criteria is and why we did what we did. That's very, very important. Because it's a huge financial piece to this that I don't think the community really understands. Having been at 2 of these school sites, I was at Walt Disney yesterday and I hadn't been there in a really long time. And I started walking up to the NPR thinking it was the admin building and the rest of the campus is gated. And that piece is just sitting out there in the weirdest place. I don't know who thought of that, but anyway, that definitely needs needs to change just for, if not anything else, for security reasons, for sure.
It works great for community use, and that's probably where the idea came from.
Probably.
The other sites. too.
But now that we have the security and the fencing and all of that, and it's just a
Right.
confusing. And San Ramon Valley High School admin building is so old and so far past its use that that really does need to happen. So as far as the rest of the sites, the other thing that came up when I was at a lot of the meetings was shade structures, outdoor. That was a priority for almost every single school, whether it was a high school, an elementary school. So that is a huge priority, I think, because I think that touches so many sites.
Right, and that's why you see the district-wide allocation for outdoor learning and dining. So as that number, that 25 million there, that is a district-wide allowance. So it can be shade, it can be, lunch tables, it can be, anything that.
Yeah, places to sit
Mhm.
was the other priority, like at lunch or whatever, they're sitting on the
So you're
ground.
not eating your lunch on the stairs.
Right, or the ground.
I think this is really logical, and I think the way you presented the history is an important part of the community outreach, to add on to what Shelley was talking about, this idea that there's a cycle. And the cycle is driven by this state piece, but it's also how we deal with fairness. And if we have a commitment to ongoingly maintain our buildings, not go back to where we were in the early 90s, this is the process, and everybody gets their turn when it's their turn. But then things like safety, which are a priority for everybody, everybody shares. And so I think this is very sensible.
I guess one piece of information that this doesn't display specifically, Walt Disney is eligible in 2031. So it just missed the cutoff, and if we were to put in all sites, again, thinking equitably, all sites eligible in 2031, we'd be over that $600 mark or $600 million mark. So what we could do, just throwing this out there as an idea, is instead of just prioritizing the NPR at Walt Disney, we could prioritize the full site. And it
Because you're
may-
touching it anyway,
because
you
we're
might as well
touching it
plan all of it.
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take advantage of all of those dollars that could be available. And this project may happen, later, so that you could, sequencing of this isn't spelled out either, but it would follow that sequence of eligibility.
So it would end up in phase one in the first bond measure. But it would happen, well, the full site would happen closer to 2031 or after 2031 to create that eligibility for state funds.
And in 2024 dollars, I'm just looking at our spreadsheet here, you're only adding another 20 million.
So you'd
to
still
this.
be under your 600. That makes sense.
And just to jog my memory, so in this phase one, that does incorporate those school sites that have increased enrollment, like Iron Horse and Twin Creeks and Montevideo. Cal. I know Montevideo
is just finished with.
Okay, yeah, and it's big enough for the increase in enrollment at this point, or,
Yes, Golden View and Montevideo and
Okay,
Iron Horse.
okay.
And Cal High, of course.
But it would, so the way that this enrollment fluctuation had been captured within all sites was to not say, okay, Montevideo, we're projecting 1,200 students there. It only has capacity for 800. Well, let's put in capacity for 12. No, we took that future enrollment projection and looked at all sites to say, where does it make sense to house these students if they're not being housed exactly where the boundaries for these schools are currently drawn?
And that's part that's integrated into this plan is we have to come back and look at the boundaries to see if they still make sense where they're located. And there might be a school that's near Golden View that could absorb some students in the boundary, and we would start a phase in of those changes in the next couple of years. And that will be a project that Tina is leading for us and will bring back to the board in the spring. I know she has a lot on her plate.
Well, and that's a really important
Yeah.
piece to use John's word, be transparent about. But again, it also falls into stewardship of resources, because if we're dealing with declining enrollment, building new capacity when we have, right, it doesn't, that wouldn't fly.
And in those same lines, so Golden View being a site that will be impacted, Montevideo being impacted, these sites won't be eligible for modernization until after 2034. So all of these sites, regardless of its enrollment projections, all these sites that aren't going to be eligible, we took a lighter hand at. We're not going to go in and redo facilities that we're just invested in.
Yeah.
So
Laura, I think your original question, were those schools in there?
Right.
They're not.
Yeah, no,
They're
but,
not-
well, but some of
not
them
all of
are,
them,
and I
yeah.
think, yeah,
But I think more globally, not pinpointing the specific schools, globally, we can accommodate the anticipated growth under this strategy.
yeah, and that's essentially the
Well,
question.
and actually that's true, but that's under the state matching fund.
Mhm.
So that's actually could be depending on need, depending on growth. The part of that could be for the bond. Right, the bond, the geo bond to go out and say, hey, we don't have any funding except for our local support.
Yeah, you need that first. And then if you want to go after state matching funds, that comes second.
Right, right.
But by being disciplined about this process of this cycle, you can deal with the equitable aspect of it. And it's always defendable. And so the way Doherty Valley was built out when it was, 3 or 4 of those, I think 3 of those elementary schools were Doherty Valley. So it's gonna be heavy Doherty Valley, but because that was all built at that chunk. And so much of that just becomes this communication and kind of fair at a higher level, not necessarily fair right at this moment.
Yeah, and you already have 1 or 2 school sites that are eligible today. So without further funding, we're playing continued catch up. Yeah, modernization.
Is there anything that we want to bring? I know you had mentioned kind of bringing in all of Walt Disney into that phase 1 from phase 2, right? Is there anything else that we want to look at in phase 2? Where do we want to think about like what that cap is? Is it 600? Or do we want to kind of stay at that 562? Or I guess it would be 582 if we're bringing in.
Yeah, I think at this point, hold it at 600 and then the polling results will give you additional information of where that line really sits. Yeah.
So for today's purposes, look at that 600 number.
Yes.
And realistically, we only really have like 20 million to look at now if we bring
Right. If
Walt Disney over,
added 20, so
yeah.
now we're at 380 or 585. Here's the slide that shows phase 2. I mean, low hanging fruit, Doherty Valley. I don't, don't want to influence, but that's
Easy one.
That probably makes sense just to include so that it's there in case it becomes a priority.
and it could be on, considered an equity item too. If it's a high need and we're catching all other high needs.
It is a high need if you've been out to Doherty at lunchtime. Yes.
And conversely, I know, the numbers that we're looking at here on the screen are all above what we're trying to fit in. And it's, more important than just playing the numbers game. But if we back up, I just, I don't want to influence the conversation, just throwing out, here's where we get more granular with the breakout. So all of these projects for Monte Vista High are included in phase 1 as it currently stands. And, we've explained why and for equity reasons, that they are included. But this would be, if you see something in phase 2 that you want to move up to phase 1, we could look at projects in this being dropped to phase 2. We could also look at that district-wide allocation of outdoor learning and dining. That's kind of a squishy area. We have it set to 25 million. Right now, that could grow, that could shrink, to move something else up into its place.
And one of the things that I want to point out are the athletic fields at Monte Vista. That is, we could use local building dollars to address the auxiliary fields there and the drainage and the ADA issues getting back there. So that could come out of the bond and be paid out of the money that's sitting in our local building fund as a project, and it could be a quick start project that we begin earlier. So that would free up some of the money that's been set aside for the deep modernization at Monte Vista, and that would add some more money back into the remainder here.
How much is that?
Well,
You said 15?
we have budgeted 15 million. We don't know yet quite. We're having Verdi come and give us a quote.
No, but I mean the money that is in that fund that you were referring to, the balance on that.
Oh, the modernization, the local building fund, Fund 21. I don't know the exact balance, but there's sufficient dollars in there to cover this.
I was just wondering if there was enough to cover the building 300.
No.
Not that.
Yeah.
How does that work with state matching funds if you actually use funds from a different source rather than from a jail bond to pay for them? You just have to go. It's your own.
It doesn't matter the source, yeah.
Because
So state match
our
can
guests
layer on top of
referred to
state
the
match.
academic buildings at Monte Vista, and that's where we
Yes.
touched a lot of those buildings. I guess we haven't touched all of them.
Not
because
300
that-
yet.
You go back to the slide with the phase 2. I mean, I feel like with the full day TK, that's kind of, a dream that who knows, and we don't really have, I mean, we have some control over, but so maybe kind of setting that aside, because that's not necessarily something in this moment in time that we're thinking about.
Setting it aside from phase 2 or setting it aside from pushing.
From pushing it into phase 1.
I would
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to kind of go through that list and see where, I would be curious with that, the full and partial campus modernization. Is there a school site in that list that's eligible in 31, just like Walt Disney is? That would be kind of an easy move into phase 1, or?
Especially if it was in North School.
Yeah.
So those sites are Bollinger Canyon, Greenbrook, John Baldwin, Live Oak, Monterey, Neil Armstrong, Quail Run, and Walt Disney. So it is a big chunk.
But like we could say, look at Monterey. I'm just thinking about how the 1998 Measure D funds worked. Country Club, Monterey, those schools were part of that. It just kind of seems like if you keep the order kind of similar, and then Baldwin, Greenbrook, Bollinger were triplets, we called them. And so kind of keeping the cycle, it's just, how do you decide? You're a parent with all these kids, right? And you're just gonna keep the time frame.
Yeah.
And
So for the phase 2, and this is something, that would go in the future, we'd come back in the future regarding the phase 2 projects that are remaining on the list for a future bond measure. So that would happen around 2030-ish for the election. And then the list might change a little bit. It might be adjusted. But the schools then would be on the quick start, those from the phase one.
Do you guys have in the backup the breakout of what Monterey would be?
Monterey, yeah, so Monterey is a total that's 41.4
Okay, so
million.
that's too big.
Yeah, but so we've already touched the safety and security aspect of it and the TK aspect of it already in phase one. So just grabbing the other pieces that aren't included, it's about 38.8 million. And this is all in 2024 dollars. So, as we get to 2031,
Probably
it'll be
too
more
big
than
for
that.
What we're trying to do here.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
need one of
And
the little ones, the light touches.
yeah, and there's no rule. It's only us chatting to hit that $600 mark. We can be below it. That's okay. We're just saying these must happen. We really want these to happen. It should have bond pass. And then when we're able to add more to that list, great. We just hate to overpromise and
Yeah,
then start scratching projects off. So
Yeah, it's hard to hit 600 on the nose.
right.
So some of those, if things go really well, you might be able to even do some of those in phase one, like you're saying, that you don't want to promise that.
Yeah, I think the way that we would document this is to kind of order this list in order of priority. Say, okay, this phase one, that's what we want to do. And then the 2031 schools and then the, whatever.
And in
it
the
is.
previous
then the
ones,
pre-K
we had that list. There
Mhm.
was a line and it was called below the line or
Mhm.
above the line. And there was some movement in the line over the 10 years.
Right, yeah, everything's.
Yeah,
Everything
same
evolves.
idea,
Mhm.
phase one, phase two, above the line, below the line.
With a clear strategy of
Mhm.
the why.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Are we in agreement with the Doherty Valley food service moving into phase one, or touched on it, but I don't know if we found consensus.
I think it makes sense,
I do too.
especially if everybody eating is continuing.
Yeah.
Mhm. And then the Walt Disney, we also, I think, made consensus on that, the full campus, right?
Okay, so the next step for us is to poll to see, and that will be with Jared and John. We'll work on that and see where we are with the community and then bring back the plan. So now that we've heard from the board, we will prepare our long-range facility plan. This plan will have a couple of tools with it. We will have a lookbook for the architects, and we will have a website for the community. And so we're wrapping those elements up, and we'll have them posted shortly after the board considers the full plan at the June 11th board meeting. All right.
Thank you so much.
Right, thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you for all your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure working with the district.
Yeah.
See you again in June.
Great. All right, and that ends that item. So public comment. I don't know, is there anyone, have we gotten any cards? I don't. No cards. Okay, no public comment. So I guess we can adjourn this workshop.